Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar for the Accounting and Finance MS programs. We're very happy to have you here today. So we have some great guests today, some of our faculty at Saunders and alumni as well, that will discuss some important topics related to blockchain, and trends in that area. Just a couple notes before we jump in, logistical items. Please feel free to use the Q&A function if you have questions. That's in the bottom window of your Zoom screen. We're happy to address anything as we work through the session, and we'll certainly address the questions that come up. So as we jump in here, I'm going to start with Dr. Archana Jain, who's going to introduce our panelists here, and we'll jump in.
Thank you, Matt. So first of all, my name is Archana Jain. I'm the Department Chair for Finance and Accounting at RIT, Saunders College of Business. And thanks for being here, everyone. We have a great group of panelists here. So let me start by introducing them. First, we have Mashal Waqar. She is the Managing Director of Milestone Ventures. Her career is impressive. So if I start going by everything, let's see what can I catch up in a small 2-minute period here. So she started off her career by building security newsletters for fintech players. Then she switched on to the media space, and her media startup impacted millions of readers globally through powerful storytelling. And then she also started in 2020 a business accelerator program with the concept of making women founders go from early stage to revenue in 60 days. Um, and then she started another consulting company focused on scaling audiences and communities. And I'm going to skip the 2023 Web3 part. I'm going to let you talk about that, Michelle. But then she has been awarded Forbes Middle East 30 Under 30, Entrepreneurs Middle East Achieving Women Award, and many different ones. So we are very excited to have you here, Michelle, to talk about blockchain and trend and so on. But we also have our in-house expert, Professor Mandu. She is the she's the professor in the Management Information System and Accounting, and she's the director of our Masters in Business Analytics program as well. And she has been here for about 14 years, if I recall correctly. And she received her PhD from Eller College of Management and at University of Arizona. And she also has 6 years of work experience as consultant and venture capital analyst in the field. So and then we also have Professor Hao Zhang with us. He is the director of our Masters in Finance and undergrad in Finance programs. So Hao and I will be asking questions, and we have the experts here to answer those questions. And like Matt said, feel free to jump in through the chat or the Q&A portion here. So first of all, to start with, Mashal, very simple. In a layman's term, how do you describe blockchain? And how did you get involved in this also?
Yeah, when I was thinking about what would be an easy way to explain it, because I'm like, I don't need to get technical, and I have a technical background, but I just, really didn't want to use anything technical to describe it. I think an easy way to think about it is, for example, think about you having a book, right? And so any transaction that you make, you write it on this book. And what you essentially do is once you're done with that page, you then turn on to the next page. But then all of your numbers from the previous pages or blocks essentially get updated based on the new numbers. And so this becomes your book. But then everyone around you can access your book and actually cross-checks and makes sure that all of your numbers are right and there's no cheating going on. And you do the same thing. So that's technically a blockchain in a very simple, easy term, right? And then it's got a few different factors and features and why it's so impressive. One part is that there's no one person. You don't have to really trust one person to make sure that this book is accurate. It's decentralized in that way because there's a whole network or group of people, if you want to call them that, right, who are checking and making sure it's all accurate and there's nothing wrong that's going on. The second part being, again, that it's easy to verify. There's transparency because you can look at other folks' books and you can see that, it's all there. And then as you kind of update things, it all kind of adds on to it. So there's no going back and changing things. There's only things you can add in based on the previous numbers. but you can't really edit essentially, and it's all recorded, whatever you do. And so I think that's that's blockchain in a nutshell. How I got into it was, so I mean, I've got a security background, but then with my startup journey, I was so disconnected from a very hardcore security side of things. But then it was in 2021 when a lot of my friends who I consider like the smartest people around me started working on this thing called Web3. And I was intrigued. I was curious. I didn't feel like I was honestly like smart enough to understand it as much because the language felt really intimidating. And so I joined a couple of programs to kind of understand more about what was happening in this space, to understand more of the technical side as well and the culture that was building around it. And that was like my entry to it. And once I got more familiar and comfortable, I realized like it felt like a whole different the start of something very different, right? A very different way of operating, doing things, running companies even, where communities and just people and just collectively could decide and change things. And it felt like very different than the structures that we're used to. And that really, really intrigued me. And that's how I got into this space. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you explain a bit more about Web3, as you mentioned, what it does? What is it, just a platform? To me, it sounds like a website where I can go and get knowledge.
Web3 is essentially the next phase of the internet. Web2 is essentially the age where we've got socials and we post on them and we're so active and everyone's connected, but this is all owned by companies, right? And there's a few different tech companies that sort of control most of how we connect with people and how we interact with people. Web3 is the next phase where it's not people, but it's essentially blockchains and it's very decentralized in terms of how these structures work. And that's sort of the ideology this industry was based on. So it's powered by blockchain. The ethos of this industry is that there's going to be transparency, open source. In Web2, you know, when you have a tech company, you protect your IP. In Web3, it's a very different philosophy where you open sources. You encourage others to take what you've built and build on top of it. So that collaborative nature is a big part of this industry. And essentially giving people essentially giving power back to users, where you can control your data, you can control and understand what's going on with whatever it is that you're becoming a part of. And that's sort of, that's Web3 in a nutshell.
Okay, sounds good. Manlu, do you want to talk about, do you have anything to add on the concept of blockchain? And then how did you get involved with that?
Okay. So I actually really like the book example that Mashal used. Very easy to understand. And actually a really good example. So how I involve in the blockchain, my area is basically, the interdisciplinary between the analytics and accounting. So that's why I really feel interested in examining the blockchain phenomenon. Actually, prior to joining IT, I was an accounting professor. So I have been accounting professor for many years. And then my PhD is MIS. And then that's why, my research area in the business analytics. And then also my undergraduate degree, which was many, many, many years ago. Now, has nothing to do actually with accounting and MIS. My undergraduate degree actually was automobile engineering. However, the knowledge that I learned from my engineering side, actually, I saw lots of connection with the blockchain, because when we look at the blockchain is about the business process. And then my engineering background can really help me to understand very well about the business process. So that's why I really got interested in the blockchain technology and how blockchain technology have the impact, especially in the accounting community.
Okay. Thank you, Manlu. How? You want to go ahead with the next question? Yep.
Yeah. Is blockchain prevailing and will it become more popular in the future?
Mashal, that's directed to you.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. I believe so. I'm a big believer in this for a few different reasons, right? I've attended a few different tech events, but one of the largest developers conference called DevCon happened in Colombia last year. And so that was my exposure to LATAM countries and how much and how essentially blockchain and crypto has been adopted there. And so with emerging countries and emerging markets where currency fluctuations happen and folks don't trust the government and their own currencies, they're using crypto to earn, to spend. I saw mom and pop stores where you could pay in crypto instead of in local currencies. And so that to me is like one of the best use cases in terms of one of the best use cases. So when there is a currency that you're not putting your trust into one centralized source, essentially, right? This is essentially an alternative to that. The other part being obviously cryptocurrency payments, cross-border transfers and things like that. Traditional bank transfers take a couple of days. With crypto, you instantly get it. And there's a way you can verify. So anytime, a lot of my projects in Web3 specifically, I get paid in crypto. And so anytime someone pays me, they'll send me like a, whatchamacallit, the transaction link, and I can actually verify and see that their wallet sent that currency and amount and it got to my wallet. And so it's instant, you can verify it, it's so quick, and it's such an easy way. In crypto, you say, don't trust, verify. That's sort of like, something that we really embody in this space. And then I think there's so much that a lot of these different countries are doing as well. There's a lot of regulation. I think the US is a little bit different, not as friendly in terms of regulation, but the rest of the world is so different. I was also in Singapore a couple of weeks ago for one of the largest tech conferences called Token 2049. And I was amazed at how much is happening in Southeast Asia and this part of the world. Of course, I'm based in Dubai in the Middle East. And so the UAE has also been really focused on trying to enable everything on blockchain, but I'd say the rest of the world is really tapped into it. And the use cases are, this is one example that I've given, but there's so many others, even around healthcare systems, right? Or legal systems, or different ways of essentially whatever we've done. I think there are so many ways to really increase it. I think the one thing that's been done though, or that the industry has done poorly, is focus too much on the tech and not as much on the consumer side, right? NFTs had such a big bubble, but then they became like a joke, I think, because a lot of people just think they're scams. The technology was actually really good. So if one example of that was Reddit had an NFT collection they launched, but they just called it collectibles and stickers, and people bought them, and they were one of the most successful launches, right? So I think when we remove the tech part, because when you use an app, you probably don't care about what the back end is, right? I think if this industry focused on how to make their apps just great apps instead of talking about and being focused on the blockchain part of it, it would be way more palatable, I think, to just regular folks. And that's sort of where I see this going over time.
So I think our next question from the audience is exactly what I was going to ask you next. Which industries are using it already, other than finance and cryptocurrency? If you don't talk about crypto, who else is using blockchain, and what problems are they solving in those industries?
One of the best examples is quadratic funding, or quadratic voting. And what that means is essentially communities come together to decide where money should go. There's a platform called Gitcoin that has been one of the pioneers in this, but there's a couple of other platforms that have started as well. Gitcoin, for reference, has given out over $55 million in grant funding. And so what they do is they'll go to companies who put up pools of funding for different grants rounds, and then communities can come together and decide how this pool should be essentially donated to projects. And the way that it works is, so if all of us were on this platform, it's not about the money or the amount. Like, we can pay $1, but then it's collective voting that can decide where this bigger funding is funneled. And this is a really great way or in use case in philanthropy, right? Where typically the way grants programs work is there's going to be a very small group that makes these decisions. It's closed off. It's not the communities who are deciding. But through using quadratic funding, for example, there's a lot of real life impact that can happen. UNICEF has been one of the first legacy companies to actually implement this and trial this out. But there's a lot of other companies. Shell actually recently had a climate round, ironically. But there's a lot of companies that are looking into this and who are looking at community-based decision-making. And so that's another example of it. Another big one is actually decentralized companies. And what that really means is typically companies will have like a C-level board and a hierarchy, but DAOs, which is the short form for decentralized autonomous organizations, are another way that companies can be run. And what it really means is community members can have voting rights that decide, and this is how decisions are made. Different folks can have different levels of votes, and essentially it's using tokens for decision making. And then you can add different utilities. Utilities essentially just means use cases, right? So maybe you're telling people for being active in a community and for engaging, you're rewarding them in ways that are, it can be social ways, but it can actually be real benefits too. So that's another way. Another thing that I've been noticing recently is the real estate industry, actually, where people are starting to figure out how to tokenize real estate sales and property sales. It's still a bit early on, but I'm seeing this happen as well. So there's a lot of different industries where there's a lot of early work that's happening, and some are a little bit advanced. It's just not made as popular. So I'd say those are really good use cases, but DAOs have been really, really good in terms of changing up what a company structure can look like. There are forums where discussions are discussions are being held and people can add in their input. Obviously there's different hierarchies. It's not just chaos, although it can be. But over time, the way that it works is when you've been active for a while and you've been contributing, you get more voting rights, or you get perks for being more active and engaged. And so there's different ways that a lot of these companies work, but essentially DAOs are another really great way, an alternative to a typical company structure. There's also been a lot of work on the legal side where incorporating DAOs and kind of having legal structures to make sure it's actually proper and legit, and all of that fun stuff has also been done. So yeah, those are a couple of other cases.
That is very interesting and fascinating to me, how a company can be run by the community. And on the voting side, again, so it's similar, as you're saying, that more experience you have, the more knowledge you have, you get more voting power. It's not based on you're contributing more money, so you get more voting power. That's not happening. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
100%. And a lot of times these tokens don't necessarily need to have a financial value. Some are just social or governance. There's different types of tokens. So there's a governance token, which is where it doesn't actually have a financial value, right? There's even different ways to delegate votes. So if you're not as active, but you trust someone who's active, you can delegate your voting up tokens to them. And so that can happen as well. And then one thing that I actually didn't mention, but I think is a great one, is using this for research. So there's companies that are actually helping support biotech and science research and projects by helping fund them. And so people can actually contribute to a lot of these research projects as well, get paid as well, and they can get paid in actual currency or stable coins. And a stable coin is essentially a cryptocurrency token where the value doesn't fluctuate. And so it's relatively safer in that aspect. But yeah, research projects. Two of my research projects recently were funded through these orgs as well. So that's another part that can totally happen, is if you're interested in a non-financial project, and it can be like a science project, or it's that area in this space is called DeSci, decentralized science. But essentially it can also be media, or like essentially I guess I'm sorry, sort of forgetting how to talk, but there's a lot of industries you can essentially be implementing this in. The use cases are totally up to you. I would say there's a lot of need for builders, to be honest, because the way DAOs work is although there are easier ways to put up these smart contracts, but there typically is, they're powered by blockchain. And so it's very transparent in terms of who gets tokens and how all of this is happening. But on the flip side, I'd say there's a lot of hackathons, and every month there's multiple hackathons in different parts of the world. Some are also online. And so if you're looking for funding to build a startup and to start a project, you could actually just apply through one of these hackathons and events. And this is a big part of this culture that's in this space. And so feel free to reach out to me after this if you're interested in any of these events. But there's multiple events every week, and they get so much funding. So yeah, there's plenty to go around to kickstart any projects that you feel like, that's even worth testing out and playing around with. So that could be another thing that could be useful.
This sounds somewhat similar to crowdfunding, if I'm not wrong, right? Okay. So before we move on to the next question, Daniel, we did start with the idea of what blockchain is, and now we are on to the discussion of what it can be used for. So just to give you 1 minute summary, as Mashal defined and Mandu agreed, blockchain is basically like a transaction that is being verified by a lot of other people. So you don't have to trust one person, but as one transaction is entered, it is being verified by many users saying, yes, this did happen. And it is backed by the previous transaction. So it's like a ledger um, authenticated by many users, not one. So that's the summary of blockchain. And we have been talking about how it can be used in the finance industry, crowdfunding, as DAO, the term that Mashal is describing. And then we also have voting, where the funding should go. And Manlu can give us a couple more examples maybe of how it is being used outside of, cryptocurrency space.
So I think Michelle gave a very good example for this for the blockchain, and I just want to add to the examples that Michelle mentioned. The blockchain also have the application for the business blockchain. So that means they not necessarily needed to use a cryptocurrency, but they use the mechanism for the blockchain. So one of the popular use for the blockchain is for the food traceability. So for the safety of the food, then they can use the blockchain, the mechanism to trace basically the original place from the food. For example, Walmart has start with a small task for the blockchain to trace the food back to the original. For example, use a pork, right? Where the pork originated from, actually trace back to the very beginning of the starting place. Another example is the coffee shop. So when I said, okay, you have the cup of coffee in your hand, do you know where this coffee from? It starts with the coffee bean. So it's like the project, like from the farm to the cup of coffee on your hand. And with the blockchain, you actually can trace every single steps. So IBM has a little user case shows that each step by step from the coffee bean to the cup of the coffee.
Thank you, Manlu. How would you like to ask the next question?
Yeah, it looks like blockchain is a great technology. So from your point of view, do we see any challenges if we want to implement this technology across different industry?
Where do I even start?
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing is regulators don't understand it. Some governments are trying to understand it. But one of the bigger challenges is that there aren't enough people coming together in a room discussing, hey, how can this work for the benefit of everybody? Because people are too attached to extremes, right? People that are so into the space and pioneers of it are way too much into the whole, we don't need to be regulated and we can just kind of operate in this free world. And so they're not willing to listen as much. And I think on the other side, there's a very strong anti-crypto narrative. And it was amplified by media horror stories like FTX. And right now, if you ask someone what is crypto, they'll say, oh, it's a scam, or, they say FTX, which is not good because there's so much of work being done outside of the cryptocurrency side. Like Manlu mentioned, the mechanism side, right? And there's so many different blockchains for different purposes that are doing incredible things. Recently, there's a chain called Aptos, and their whole point is to help scale a layer one blockchain. So there's different layers and different levels of blockchains, right? Layer ones are the essentially the main ones, but then layer twos are to help with scaling, to make gas fee accessible, and to make it more usable. And so this company called Aptos that did a partnership with Microsoft. Now they're doing one with this entertainment company called, I believe it was Universal. I'm blanking on the exact name, but essentially there's different ways that partnerships are happening, but one is the media narrative, the second is the regulation side. And I think the third, and this is specifically for crypto products, is they're not very usable for someone who hasn't used a crypto wallet before, right? A lot of these apps and companies and what they've created are products for crypto people. And so I think the language, the user experience, the whole like UX UI needs to be way more simple and way easier to understand, because like I'm thinking, how can my mom use, an app that's powered by blockchain, right? Right now, it's a little bit more complicated because of how technical it is. And then the other part, like if you have a wallet, typically there's something called a passphrase, and this is what you need to make sure that you have access to your wallet. Now, if you're like me and you have a bunch of your earnings and your net worth essentially in investments in a wallet, losing this like 12-word phrase can be disastrous. And so I think the user experience is another one that people really need to focus on and to help make it easier.
Thank you, Mashal. So given all the challenges we are talking about, I'm going to switch gear to the accounting side for a minute and ask Manlu, how does blockchain technology currently impacting auditing and accounting industry, or what is the potential in the future, and so on? So what are your thoughts on that? You're muted, Manlu. I did the same thing.
Okay, here we go. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I think you asked a good question, and this is a big topic. So because of my background, I have examined this phenomenon this year, and my end goal to look at this is really that's one of the topic I'm studying, how blockchain technology impact accounting and auditing industries. And I have wrote several papers on this topic. But I would like to say that we might need to wait for several years more to see the specific impact. It takes time. However, I would say that blockchain technology has a potential to revolutionize the audit process. Why is that? Because if you look at the auditing process, as we know, the traditional audit process is very time consuming, right? So basically what the auditors, does is the team of auditors reviewing the companies, the financial records, they try to ensure that they are accurate and in compliance with the regulations, right? Now, as Mashal said, blockchain is a decentralized system, right? So it allows for transparent and immutable record for all transactions. And because of this technology, they can reach to this kind of level of transparency and accountability. And this can significantly reduce the need for traditional audits. So that is the impact. Now, the question might be, if the traditional audits service is reduced, now what is left for auditor to audit? Now, actually, blockchain brought lots of new opportunities for auditors. So just give you several examples. For example, although that company uses blockchain, but a transaction recorded in a blockchain may still have the problem. I saw one of the questions from the audience. So for example, using the Walmart, the food trace examples, when they trace the food, the pork to the original place, still they needed to record the transaction, right? So that transaction recorded, there might be some issues. For example, there might be unauthorized or fraudulent or illegal, right? Or, this transaction might executed between the related parties. Or this transaction might link to a side agreement. Actually, is not in the blockchain, it's off-chain, right? Or, this transaction is incorrectly classified in the financial statements, right? So this could happen. For these things, the blockchain network, they cannot capture. So the auditors, they can capture these issues. And another example might be, in the accounting, we know when you put into this amount, right? So the transaction recorded in the financial statement, they can reflect its estimated values, not the historical cost. So how you estimate the value? Under which guidelines? So this need to be examined. And these are the services, that the new opportunities that the blockchain technology brought and for the auditors to audit.
Okay. Manu, may I ask follow-up questions? Yeah, so as we know, Big Four company, they are leader of the accounting industry, right? So I'm just wondering, what are these industry leaders exactly doing in terms of blockchain technology adoption? In addition to that, we have some local accounting firm here. I'm just wondering whether for the smaller accounting auditing firm, are they studying this to adopt the blockchain technology? Yeah.
Good question, Hao. So, during the past 10 years, the big four accounting firms, including EY, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, right? And also along with the many financial institutions, have been very actively adopting the various strategies for blockchain. I have been involving in a study with a paper examining this issue, and I interviewed these big four companies. So what I saw is all the big fours are very active involving the adopting strategies for the blockchain. Now, here are several examples. For example, I think one of the big things I see is the audit and assurance service. Because of the rise of the blockchain-based financial systems, the auditing firms, now they started to explore how to audit blockchain-based transaction effectively. So basically, they switch from the traditional auditing service to become the blockchain auditing. So that actually is I would say it's a big switch. And several other things they are doing is the big fours are playing the leadership to helping their client to understand more about the blockchain, because lots of clients, they're also involving in these blockchain activities. So right now they started to play in the leadership to provide some of the service or advisory to help their client start to, to understand the technology and understand how to adopt. Because in the end, if you look at this, they are in the same network. If they adopt the technology, auditors, clients, everyone is in the same network. And also, all big four, they invest very significantly in the R&D for the blockchain solutions. And some of their, the firms, they have the special team for the blockchain. I remember I attended a conference, EY conference, and they have a special team, blockchain technology, blockchain team to look at these solutions. And also another thing I see is the big four, they are all actively trying to partner with the related parties. So for example, back to around 10 years ago, Deloitte actually took the first step in launching the blockchain initiative. And the KPMG has partnered with Microsoft in the joint projects to explore this, the possibilities. So I think these are the big things, and several other things they talk about is, as Mashal said, the regulation and the compliance guidance. Because of this technology, lots of regulations need to be set up. So the big four are actually also taking the leadership to involving this process to set up the regulation and compliance guidelines. And of course, education and training. So they are very actively to provide the training programs to their staffs and to their clients. So these are what I see that happening with the big four.
Thank you, Manlu. Switching back to Mashal, so kind of two things here. What do you think is the cost of implementing? Is that a hurdle in terms of when you're thinking about venture capital side of the business? How much does it cost for someone, and who is using it? Is the person who's seeking the money should be thinking about it, or is it the person who's providing the money is thinking about the blockchain?
So there's different layers to this answer. Part of it cost would be a problem if you are building the platform that uses the blockchain, right? That's why layer 2s exist. It's to make it more accessible, to make it cheaper. But the really good thing right now is that because every chain wants to get more users and to get more activity, they're giving out grants for people to build on their platform. And they're also giving out vouchers and credits to bring down the cost of building on their chains. And so there are really good incentives, and almost every ecosystem has these incentives to get more people to build on them. If you have an idea, typically the way the process works is before you could go out and get venture funding, but you can actually get money and funding even without getting VC funding as a starting point, just through the programs and the ecosystem development opportunities that a lot of these chains have. When you're sending crypto, there is a gas fee, right? And so that can depend on a few different things. It can depend on, and it changes up depending on how many people are using that chain and which crypto you're transferring and what network it is. Some are more accessible and cheaper in their solutions. And so some like Polygon or a few of these other ones make it more, again, they make the cost, or Optimism, they make the cost almost like minuscule, so it doesn't really matter. But then the bigger ones can still take that. And so when you're sending it, you have to keep that in mind. When you're receiving it, there isn't really a cost. But if you've built a platform, then you have to think about the cost part for sure. And then you have to think about the network load, right? So if you've built something, and a lot of people use your platform, it's kind of like thinking about cloud computing almost, right? You would have a server and then you pay for more servers if you have more users. So blockchain is similar, wherein you have to think about that, and then that's how you calculate it and plan for it.
So follow-up questions. So let's say if RIT is big on entrepreneurship, we have a lot of students who, including you, think of that route, go into the entrepreneurship mode. So again, based on what you said, which platform do you think is the most famous, so to say, these days? Which cryptocurrency are they using? And then once I, let's say, got the money, let's say if I am a venture, I'm a entrepreneur starting up something, I got the money from this platform in crypto format. Now, how do I use it in my business?
Okay. So there's a few different ways to do that. One can be let's start from the first part. Depending on the chain, not every chain has a token. So it could be the blockchain without having the currency aspect. If you are using one for the currency, that's different, but sometimes it's just the chain. So that's one thing to consider. The second one would be each program and chain has a different operating mechanism and assessment mechanism. I recently did a report on grant programs in this industry. There's been over $1 billion committed and over $500 million that's been deployed just within 13 programs that me and another researcher studied. But there's so much more funding going around for people to build projects on these, right? And these projects don't have to be related to something financial. It can literally just be a social project that brings in a real use case to the blockchain. And so I can talk about that a little bit as well. But essentially, the way that you would request funding is you kind of share what you would spend on. It could be paying yourself. It could be paying for the platform. It could be for paying for people you want to hire or bounties. And so there's different things that you can budget for. And you typically or ideally, hopefully have a roadmap in terms of when you want to test it out, what the research part is, when you want to deploy it, and then when you kind of launch. And you can kind of map that out and essentially, kind of like with any project, right? You put together a plan, you put a roadmap, you put some metrics and KPIs, and then you apply, or you post it on the forum. And in terms of what's very popular, so Ethereum is one of the most popular ones that's very adaptable in terms of it has a lot of different ways that you can use it. And they're trying to be the most innovative. They've spent years working on the development side of it, and it has some of the largest developer communities. And that's important because if you are thinking about the technical side, you ideally want an ecosystem that has a lot of active developers for two reasons. One, to build the platform. Two, because if there's a lot of developers and a lot of people using that chain, the chances of it going down are very little. So Ethereum is also, they recently had this merge where they became super sustainable. And so now the energy use, one of the biggest criticisms of crypto before, or blockchains in general, was how much energy consumption happened. And Ethereum changed that, where they actually have less energy consumption around the world than the tech companies. And there was some graph where it's, pretty small in terms of comparison. So Ethereum is pretty popular. A scaling solution for Ethereum is Polygon, for example. There's a Aptos is a growing one, but I would recommend Optimism as another one. A lot of these newer layer 2s are also cross-chain, so you don't need to be restrictive to one bigger blockchain. You can actually spread. But I just recommend Ethereum because there's a lot more educational resources and you can learn more. Now, the opportunity with newer chains, though, is that it's not as saturated. So there's more opportunities and you can still learn more. Like Cosmos is one that's been doing well in the gaming side. And so each blockchain has sort of also picked an area. Like Polygon spent millions and millions of dollars trying to get a lot of companies to adopt their chain. So Starbucks was a big collaboration that they had. And they were trying to get a lot of other entertainment companies too. But I guess the reason why I'm saying this is essentially you can pick one and then you can build on it, or you can test with a few different ecosystems. But each of them have their pros and cons, and you just have to figure out how much time and resources you have, and then, what feels like a better fit. Because if a platform doesn't have your use case or your project, then that's a good opportunity for you to enter it. And, just to be able to get more resources for your thing.
Thank you, Mashal. So I just have a paper accepted from a journal on the Ethereum merge from proof of work to proof of stake, and how, because of the lower energy, the cost has gone down and so on. So I'm not going to get into the detail, but I understand what you're talking about.
I'd love to read
that. I will send you the link when it comes up in the journal. So the last question for both Manlu and Mashal: what would you tell our students to prepare for this world? And we can start with Manlu this time. So this changing, emerging market, something new is happening. So what should our students do to prepare themselves for this world? Manlu, you go first, and then Mashal.
Thanks, Archana. This is such a serious question. Okay, so I'm going to share my view. So Michelle talked about the ecosystem for the talk about the different parties, and that is really I want to talk as well. I think the blockchain technology actually really brought a new business ecosystem for the accounting community here. And the traditional parties in the accounting community will be like auditors, tax authorities, companies, regulators. But now with the technology, blockchain technology, the developers, the tech companies, right? These are all in this ecosystem in the community already. So I think the simple way, Archana, to answer this question will be, our students and all the parties, actually, including our students. Our students are the very important party in this ecosystem, the accounting community here. All the parties need to embrace more about the technology. For the CPA, if especially for the accounting students, this CPA career is a major career for them, right? So I'm looking at the future, the future role of the CPA might change because of this technology. So for example, there's more opportunities there. For example, the CPA, they can become the auditors of, let's say, smart contract, right? Smart contract is the very essential part for the blockchain. They can help to verify implementation, verify the interface between smart contract and the external data source, right? And also the CPA, they can provide the service for the consortium blockchain. For example, they can become the independent assurance to the architectures. And also CPA, they can perform the administration functions for this. So there are lots of different new opportunities for CPA to explore. So I think in summary, I would like to say that blockchain brought lots of exciting opportunities to the accounting community.
Thank you, Manlu. Mashal?
I would start with I would also start with community. If you're, regardless of which region you're in, there is probably a local blockchain community, and there was probably an Ethereum community as well. If not, most of the space actually works online. So download an app called Discord on your phone or on your laptop, and then you can join any of the DAOs or the communities that are working to get more people to learn about the space, or even, you can jump into some of the blockchain communities directly as well. A few that I would recommend, there are programs that you can actually enroll in that are online and are part-time, and that you can probably spend a couple of hours for a few months and learn more about them. SheFi is one, Kernel is another one. Bankless is a community, and they've got a few different, they've got newsletters, they've got a podcast, and a few different ways of helping people understand the industry, one, and then they have a lot of educational content to onboard people into this space. And so check out Bankless DAO. They actually help people learn about DAOs by being part of one. And so there's going to be an onboarding experience you'll go through, and then you can ask any question. No question is silly or stupid. And then you can essentially, a lot of this is community driven, right? So it's what you make of it. You don't even need to disclose your name or your details. A lot of people take up online identities and they use their usernames, and that's how they interact and are very influential parts of this industry. And so that's totally a way that you can do things as well. But I would say, Bankless is a really good way to start. That's that. And then the programs, that's sort of how I got into the space. There's a lot of educational content that you could also do without the community aspect. Like there is a lot of detailed documentation. There's a lot of breakdowns. And then just know that it takes time to understand it, right? Some of the best, there's always an event going on. The next one is DevConnect in Istanbul. A few weeks ago was in Singapore, and then Denver is when one of the largest Ethereum conferences in the US happens. So that's going to happen next year in February. But if you attend an event, you can actually, I think the real life value of going to an in-person event, or actually New York might be a closer option. There's a bunch of, there's always an event related to the industry happening in New York. And so try to go to one of these events and just attend, ask questions, meet people. And if it's panel related, sit in on some of these sessions and learn more. And that's always a good starting point.
Okay, thank you, Mashal. How you have another question for her?
I'm good here. Very
Okay.
good.
Right. So I got the idea of what you're saying for students, where to get the knowledge and go attend the events to learn more. Is there anything for hands-on experience? So I'll give you an example. Investopedia Stock Simulator, you might be familiar with that, allows students to trade for fun. There is no real money involved, but they just invest and it mimics the real market, right? So I'm using that in my class, for example, right now, where we are all trading and seeing who's the winner by the end of the semester. So is there anything like this in this blockchain or crypto space for students to just do hands-on experience learning?
I think Stacks is a good platform to start that they could probably try out. Ethereum has a couple of platforms linked in their resources and in guides as well. Metaschool is another one. Metaschool actually has a bunch of different chains and programs as well as part of this. And then one thing I actually forgot to mention to get hands-on experience would be just participate in a hackathon. Typically they're 24 hours or 48 hours. You don't need to have a technical background. You having a finance or a business background can be really good, because to pitch a project, you do need presentation skills. You do need to have an idea that can actually make sense. And so, even if you don't know stuff about the space, do a little bit of reading, but for the most, that's one of the best ways to understand how the space works, right? Even if you're not contributing as much, that's probably going to be the best crash course into the industry. And you never know, you could actually win a bunch of prize money as well. So hackathons are a great way. And there's online hackathons as well. So that would be another one. And
yeah. I was going to say, can you elaborate more? I'm interested in that. I want to sign up.
Yeah. So there was one that recently just happened. Actually, I think it's going to happen in a few days. It's called ETH Global. So that's one that happens online. And then you mentioned, and let me actually share some links to hackathons here as well. But typically whenever there's a crypto event happening in any part of the world, there is going to be a hackathon, because this is how they get developers to start building on their chains. So there's usually prizes from each ecosystem as well. So there's the bigger hackathon prize, and then there's ecosystem prizes that these chains give out. And then another one to actually play around with is called Unlock. That's another good one. They have guides and you can kind of play around and test it, and it's very interactive as well. So you could learn from that.
Maybe I will follow up with an email to ask you give me the list of these, and when we post the recording of this webinar, we can share the link of those resources as well. I think, Matt, does that sound good to you in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. May I ask
Matt,
a follow-up question?
yes.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, it's a good idea for a finance or accounting student to partner with the students in other majors. So to participate into the hackathon or this kind of event, right? So from finance accounting perspective here, when we try to train them, we try to integrate our curriculum with technology, analytics, this kind of things. So I'm just wondering how we can better prepare our students for a business world, right? That really implement blockchain technology. Yeah.
I think an event or a panel like this is such a great way as a starting point. Get industry experts to the session, figure out a way to get people from the industry to talk about what is happening in their ecosystem. I do think every course should have a little bit of a primer on case studies that are real life use cases of projects already being used and those that are being built. That would be a good perspective, I think, for students to get exposure. And the other part would be obviously to, I think, maybe try to get some events to be organized at RIT. One of the best things that actually you could probably do as a professor is also to reach out to some of these ecosystem folks from each of these chains and ask them, hey, we'd love to get more exposure for our students here. We do have a tech side, but we've also called these other majors. So kind of trying to co-organize and then getting some funding for that. Because again, they do deploy funds for events and a lot of them. And so that could be another way that could work really well. And then there's something called College DAO, which has gotten a bunch of different, it's a very student-run organization that I just got to know. And they're trying to get students into this space all across the world. I think they have more than 20,000, is it 20,000? Sorry, I think it's like 300 universities and 20,000 students that are part of this. But essentially, that's another place where they share resources for people that are trying to learn. So I'll send you a Telegram link for that. But I think there's a lot of different collaboration opportunities that could also work.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. Is there any question from the audience here or attendees? We'll just give another minute, and then I guess anything else anyone wants to share about this blockchain space? Anyone? Manlu, anything else you want to add on?
Yeah, so I just want to add several things. One thing here is for the students, if you take the accounting program, you also need to explore, more like the technology. There's lots of ways, as Mashal mentioned here, and also there are lots of certificate or the online resource about technology, about applications, and you can explore that as well. And also like how I mentioned, the minor, the double major, all these opportunities, as long as you can get to know more about the technology, they'll be helpful.
Okay. I guess thank you for your time, both Mashal and Manlu. We really appreciate it. I got a lot out of it. I'm sure our students did too, and attendees. But I'll follow up, like I said, about the resources, and we'll share with everyone later. So, Matt, is there anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thank you again, Mashal. It was great. Very insightful stuff. And we just really appreciate you coming back and doing this. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me. Excited to see we all build. I hope this inspires more building in this space.
Yep. And if you're ever in Rochester, let us know and we'll host an event with you.
I'm trying to do that actually. I'm trying to, well, not in Rochester in specific. I'm trying to get more of the ecosystem folks to host these for schools and universities here. But the plan is, and if there's a way that we could actually get RIT to work with some of these communities, like that could be cool. Let's
That would
let's
be
definitely
great. Yes. Please feel free to reach out if there is any opportunity for our students to participate through you. We would really appreciate that. Yep.
awesome.
All
Great.
right. Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon and have a good weekend.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.